Craft fair markets can be incredibly helpful in visibility and growing your business, but they can also be a giant waste of time and maybe even end up costing you money in the long run. Hi y'all, I'm Brittany, the maker behind Ginger Patch Designs, and today I want to share with you how to properly set sales goals for your market so that you don't waste your time and your hard-earned money. I feel like craft fairs have changed so much over the years. Even just the last almost 10 years that I've been doing it, I've seen major changes. Craft fair events have changed drastically. And so with that, we as small business owners, especially if you're a one-woman show like me, we have to be really picky and choosy about which ones are best for our particular business. As we become more experienced on the market scene, you kind of learn how to figure out which ones are best for you and which ones aren't, but more on that later in the video. In this video, I'm going to share what I do to maximize my time, my planning, and my effort before I go into a craft fair so that I'm not wasting any of my time and money. And then I'm going to share some real life examples where I had to learn the hard way and what I do now to kind of weigh what's best for my business. Before we talk about how we would even set our sales goals, we need to discuss factors that go into making those decisions, because my sales goals vary depending on the market. And I know that because I have done these markets over and over again, and the factors for each vary. So the first obvious factor is going to be your event fee. Most one-day event fees are going to be anywhere from $25 to around $100. If they're more than $100, that might weigh in your decision. Your multi-day festivals are going to run probably no less than several $100s and could be even up into the thousands depending on where and how big of an event it is. The second factor is your travel time. This is going to be gas, possible overnight stay, and the food. I do not need to tell you how expensive the food is at these events. I always bring food with me, but then inevitably we've got to have some fried Oreos or that overpriced lemonade, right? And so those are things that you need to factor into your overall goals. The overall traffic or vibe of the event. Now, if you've never done the event, this might be something that you need to beep, boop, boop, just get online, go to their social media pages. If you have vendor friends that have worked the event before, I talk a little bit more about this in my previous video of how to actually find events. If you want to go check that out, I go into more depth there. But what I mean by the overall vibe is if it is a well-trafficked event, if it's high energy, like there's a lot of kids activities, or if it's like a holiday specific one and Santa is there and it's just, there's just a lot of energy going on, or, you know, if it's a fundraising event, that could put off a different vibe and affect, you know, what you bring and how much you should expect to make. You should also factor in appropriate price points for the market. For example, I don't make crochet dragons as much as I used to, but I used to make huge jumbo crochet dragons. I'm not going to bring a $100 crochet dragon to my local farmer's market. However, the holiday mart that I do in November, where people come to pay and it's really bougie and like, you talk about a vibe, they have no problem paying $100 for a jumbo crochet dragon. You know what I mean? Another example would be if it is an outdoor festival where there's like a lot of rides or there's face painting, a lot of kids activities. That would be really great for your smaller price points because kids oftentimes have their own money to spend, or the parents are there spending money on their children, or, you know, the smaller price points tend to do really, really well at outdoor kid-centered events like that. And just as a complete side note that I just thought of, do not discount smaller price points in your overall goals. I sold $12 crochet turtles for 3 years. And I'm going to tell you right now, turtles and chubby kitties helped me remodel my bathroom. That's not a boast. That's just a don't discount these smaller price points, because if you find a good one, I'm sorry, that was a bug. If you find a good one that sells really well, it could be your bread and butter. The last factor that I feel is a really important one that I don't see talked about a whole lot is your personal circumstances. I am a mom and I'm a stay-at-home working mom that also homeschools. And so my personal circumstances are greatly going to impact what I am able to do. Most of the markets that I do by myself, but the larger ones, There are some that it is just nearly impossible to do by myself. And so I have to make sure my husband can go with me. My husband travels a lot for work. And so I would love to branch out and do some of these huge multi-day events that I know that I would be successful at, but I just can't. I'm in the busy season of life. I'm in the messy middle in my business. And as much as I would love to grow my business as much as possible, I have to be here for my daughter. I have to take care of business at home while my husband's on the road. And so I'm sharing that to say your personal circumstances of where you're at are going to greatly impact what events and how many you're going to be able to do. So don't beat yourself up about that. Just do what you can. Another thing that doesn't get talked about a whole lot is weather. Now, this is obviously the weather that you know about ahead of time. Like if you go to an event and it's not supposed to rain and it does, you can't do anything about that, especially if it's outside. But mainly the ones that I'm talking about is the heat. I flat out refuse to do outdoor events in the thick of the summer here in West Tennessee, because if you live here, I don't need to explain. It's miserable. Kudos to those that do, but weather makes people, they're not gonna wanna stand and look at something if it's in the straight sun or if they're hot and they're just kind of ready to go. Whereas if the weather is breezy and warm or even a little bit on the cool side, but it's not cold, really sets the vibe and the tone for them to just have an overall more fun and light experience. That does often translate to more sales. So after you've considered all of these factors that go into an event, I still do this to this day, you're going to create a baseline goal. Your baseline goal is essentially just covering all of your basics, the event fees, the gas, the travel expenses, all of those expenses essentially that you've already forked over before the event or during the event. That can be kind of hard to do if you haven't actually done the event yet, but after you've done it once, you'll be able to calculate it. For example, I have a huge 3-day festival at Reelfoot Lake here in just about 4 weeks when I put this video out, and I know that it's a 1-hour drive one way to the event, and I will be driving it 4 times. I'll be going to set up and then the 3 days of the event. So that is 2, 4, 6, 8 hours of driving, which is going to be the better part of 2 gallons of gas. So that's how I'm going to calculate gas for that event. Did I say 2 gallons? I meant to say 2 tanks of gas. I drive a truck. I'm sorry. Now, before we get to the nitty gritty of how you're actually going to set your goal, I want to touch on how a lot of people, including myself, initially set their booth fees when they're new. The whole X times your booth fee. Like if you paid $25 for your booth fee, you'll see people make like, oh, I made 10 times my booth fee. And I just want to preface what I'm about to say, and that I am not trying to be negative. I am trying to be encouraging and helpful, and just know that I have literally done everything that I'm about to say, and I have since learned as you grow and as you progress as a market vendor / small business owner, or even if this is a side hustle, it doesn't matter. You learn that you outgrow that way of thinking about your goals. And that's very, very important. And please let me explain. That way of thinking is completely fine when you are just starting out, because you are trying to learn so many different parts of being a craft vendor all at once, and you feel like you're flying by the seat of your pants, and every event is so different, and it can be overwhelming and very, very challenging. But once you get your bearings, okay, you need to try to shift from that mindset. For example, if you work a 6-hour event and it was only $25 to get in, which honestly is very cheap now. I've seen an overall uptick in the fees, which, I mean, what hasn't gone up? So, but just for the sake of explaining, let's say it was a $25 fee and you made 10 times your booth fee. Well, that's only $250 for 6 hours. Now, I don't know what your overhead is or how much, your cost of the product and your profit margins are, which is a whole nother conversation, but $250 for essentially a full day, and that's just your revenue. That's not your profit. You can see how initially it might be okay to start with that mindset, of X times your booth fee, but you need to start to shift from that. Let me give you some examples. In 2019, I went to a show in Blytheville, Arkansas. It's an hour and a half from my house. I paid $100 for a one-day event. It was at an event center and it was marketed, this holiday shopping, whatever. And please bear in mind, this was years ago. This was a huge learning experience for me. Literally everything that could have gone wrong for this event went wrong other than setup. Setup was pretty smooth. It was inside. So first of all, $100 for, I think it was like 6 or 7 hours, I can't remember, was a red flag for back then, because back then $100 for a single day was the most I had ever spent. This could be a red flag, not always, is they were charging people to get in. I did not know that when I applied for it. And I honestly don't recall if that was on the vendor contract. Actually, there wasn't even a contract. I just paid to sign up. Another red flag that I learned from. I would have been super hesitant to go to an event at all that were making people pay to get in. There is currently only one event I do anymore that charges to get in, and it is my best event of the year. So it was $100 to get in. It was about a 3-hour round trip, which was around $40-ish. Again, I drive a truck, and I do apologize for my really sloppy handwriting. You would think as a former teacher, I'd have good handwriting. I don't. My sales were a whopping $109. So as far as the event fee, I broke even. I feel like I lost money on the few things that I sold, right? Because there was no revenue left to compensate for the materials on that, let alone the time it took me to make them. And if you factor in gas, I definitely lost money. So that's a very simple, smaller event example of why you need to factor in all of these things in setting your goals. A larger example where I actually thought I did pretty good, but I totally did not, was the first time I ever did the Reelfoot Lake one that I was talking about earlier. In 2017, I think I did that one, and it was a 3-day event. It is 3 full days, so like 24 hours, and that's not including setup time, takedown time, or drive time. I mean, they are jam-packed days. This is definitely not the case anymore. The fee's gone up a lot, but back then the fee was $175 for the whole weekend. Gas, I am just guesstimating, it was around $75. We did not set up a day in advance that year. We just set up the morning of. So 6 hours total of driving is how I got that. And then again, I don't remember how much we spent on food. It was probably more than that. So I'm just lowballing here to get that's supposed to say $280. And my sales were a whopping $975, which means after just these expenses, I made $695 for the entire weekend. I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I made almost $1,000. No, I didn't. No, I didn't, because I had also spent hundreds on the basics, tent, table covers, a few displays, etc. And let's just say for the sake of argument that I had already had those things, $700 essentially for 3 full days is not sustainable. So let's talk about setting an hourly goal instead of X times your booth fee. We're going to set an hourly goal based on past sales and or show size. Again, if you haven't done the show before, you won't really be able to figure that out till you get there. You'll just have to guesstimate based on what information you're able to gather online and or talking to people that you know that have done the show. I'm going to be setting my sales goal based on an hourly rate instead of X times the booth fee. Then I need to calculate those initial factors like event fee, gas, food, etc. That's the baseline goal that I hope to make back within just the first few hours of the show, so that the rest of the show can go towards profit, or profit margins, I should say. I also need to calculate the hours of the show. And what I mean by the hours, single day events, they're either 4, 5, 6, 8 hours, right? But the multi-day events, however many hours the show is open, for example, that I'm going to use is the Reelfoot Lake that I have in a few weeks. It is a 3-day event, and it is 24 hours total that the event is open. 24 hours of my ability to make sales at this event. So for example, this is my baseline that I need to make back in the first few hours. I need to make around $400 the first few hours of this 3-day event. And it's 24 hours total. Now, I have done this event several times several years ago, and then this is my second year doing it just recently. But based on that and based on my experience at other similar shows, for 24 hours, 3 days at the traffic at this event, my goal is $5,000 for the entire weekend. Now, please don't run away scared. This is not usual for every event. This is just a really big one. I actually hope to make more than that, but that is my realistic goal. Again, weather plays a huge role, especially at this event. This is one that actually, it's either one of two ways. It's miserable hot, or it's actually breezy enough that you could drink a coffee. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, if this is my overall goal, I'm gonna divide 24 into 5,000, and that equates to $208 an hour. So my hourly goal is around $200. The reason I divide it like that, like an overall for the whole event, is because if you're not new to events, you know sometimes the first hour you don't even make a sale, or you just make like one or two, and then in the busiest hours, I might make $400 or $500 per hour in those heavier times, but only like $30 or $50 at closing or opening. You know, it's very dependent. And so I like an overall average, the whole event. If I were to average it out, this is what my goal should be. And looking at it like maybe a day at a glance is also helpful, because sometimes you have way busier days than others. If you ever do events on a Sunday, like a Saturday and a Sunday, Sundays are usually, in my experience, they're slower but steady. They're not like boom, 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 you know? And so you can factor it however you want, but I highly encourage you to look at it through an hourly goal lens versus X times your booth fee. I think this is going to change how you approach your inventory. I also feel that doing it with an hourly rate really gives you a good perspective as to whether or not these events are really worth your time or not. Because let's say that my hourly goal for this event that we just did was $200. And at the end, there's a cat, I'm sorry. I have multiple pets and they're not usually allowed in here, but she snuck her way in. I guess I didn't have the door shut all the way. But like, let's say my hourly goal was $200 and I only came away at the end of the weekend with $50 an hour. Now that sounds great, right? But you have to remember, you're not taking home that much money. You know, I'm not pocketing $5,000. Much of that is going to go into materials and expenses and overhead. So I have to make enough to pay for all of that and pay myself for my time. My husband doesn't really get paid for his time, but that's kind of like husband duty, right? I'm in no way trying to say that doing it this way, this hourly goal rate way, is the best way, but I will say that it has absolutely changed a lot for the way that I approach market season. It has helped me tremendously. You know, a few years ago, I was trying to sign up for as many markets as possible. And again, I was still learning and it was a side hustle at the time. So I was just having fun and trying to make side hustle money, right? And if that is you, go on with your bad self. Like, I am not trying to dissuade you from signing up for as many markets as you want. You have to try them to see if they're worth it. But at the same time, I would encourage you to evaluate whether you're doing a side hustle or this is your full time, to evaluate if it's truly worth your time. And I feel like looking at it through this lens will help you do that. I really hope that wasn't terribly confusing and you got the gist of what I was trying to convey, and that I was not trying to be negative. I'm just trying to be helpful. And friends, let me know down in the comments what other craft fair related topics that you want me to add to our market vendor playlist. And if you will, just give this video a like and subscribe so other crafty babes like you can find it. And I will see you later, friends.